Hi everyone, I'm Bia, and welcome back to Cardiac Radio for Teens. For those of you who might not know, Cardiac Radio for Teens is a place where teens can come together with other teens to learn about Spiritist teachings and topics in a way that makes more sense to us and is more relatable to us as teenagers in today's society. So, for years now, we've been reading through the Spirits book together, going through the basics of Spiritism and what it is, and going through each question, each page, and reading it. And not only reading it, but trying to understand it and trying to learn from it and trying to apply that to our daily lives. So we left off last week finishing off the section about the law of freedom. And the last question in this section is a theoretical explanation of the motive behind human action. So the last question isn't really a question itself, but it's more of just a recap of everything in the law of freedom, since it was a long section. So we left off in the middle of the recap, so we'll finish up the recap and hopefully move on to the next section this week. But also I'd like to say that I got a new edition of the Spirits book, so we'll see if maybe the explanations are a little bit easier to understand and words that are more clear to us, because the last edition that I had, and some editions that we all have, are translated from French to Portuguese and then from Portuguese to English. So in that translation, a lot of things get lost or misunderstood, or maybe not even misunderstood, but it's not words that we commonly use every day anymore. So with this new translation, it was translated directly from French to English, so we skip out on translating it to Portuguese first, and it's more current, so hopefully the language will be easier for us to understand. So let's pick up where we left off. According to common belief, human beings derive all their instincts from themselves. These instincts proceed from their physical bodies, for which they are not responsible, or from their own nature, which would provide them with an equally valid excuse for their imperfections. If such were the case, they could rightly claim that it is through no choice of their own that they are what they are. Spiritism is more moral. It admits the free will of humans in all its fullness, and, in telling them that yielding to a vile suggestion made by another spirit when they do wrong, it makes them fully accountable for their actions. It recognizes their ability to resist contemptible suggestions, which is easier than fighting their inner nature. Accordingly, Spiritism theory dictates that no temptation is irresistible. People can always ignore the invisible voice addressing their inner consciousness, just as easily as they can ignore a human voice. They can always withdraw from the suggestions tempting them to do wrong by exerting their will against the temptations. They can ask God to give them the necessary strength and call out to good spirits for help. It is what Jesus taught us in the Lord's Prayer when he told us to recite, "And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil." So here the point that they're bringing up is that sometimes we think that, so some of my instincts are just human nature. It's part of being the animal that is a human being. So it's part of just our bodies to have these physical instincts, like we need to eat and all of these things that we've talked about. And sometimes we say, but our other thoughts are influenced by spirits. So things that I do, there's a spirit influencing me to do. So if there's a bad thing, then there's a spirit that's influencing me to do that bad thing. So we kind of want to put the blame on the spirit, say, they influenced me to do it, so it's their fault. But no, that's not how it works. It was still up to us to listen to their influence. And this doesn't even just happen in talking about like the spirits influencing us, but people around us. If your friend is doing something bad and they influence you, they peer pressure you into doing that bad thing, if you get in trouble, you can't say, but they did it first. You still did it, so you're still going to be wrong. The both of you are going to be in trouble. But it doesn't mean that you're excused just because the other person did it first, because you're fully to blame because you followed along and you had the ability to stop. You had that freedom of will. You had that freedom of will to make a different choice, but instead you followed what they did. So even in things that we may think that we're influenced by something else, we do have that freedom to resist that. So that's where our freedom of will comes in. So even if we do something and say, oh, there's nothing I could do, no, you could have resisted it. There's always a way to resist it. And of course, if we continually keep struggling to resist something, then we can ask God to help us, to give us the strength, and we can ask the good spirits to come and help us. And they're not just going to come save us and pick us up on the bad path and put us on the good path, but they're going to help guide us to have the strength to resist those temptations and have the strength to say no and make our own path and do the better thing. And then they continue. This theory of the cause of human action is the natural conclusion of all the teachings of spirits offer now. It is not only sublime in terms of morality, it is also greatly enhances the self-respect of human beings. It shows them that they are as free to escape the shackles of the obsessor as they are to close the doors to their houses to unwelcome intrusions. They are not machines, powered by an impulse that is dependent of their will. Rather, they are capable of reason, and possess the power to listen, to compare, and to choose freely between two different suggestions or recommendations. We should add that individuals are not deprived of their initiative when receiving advice. What they do is of their own volition, because they are still spirits, although incarnated in a physical envelope, and as human beings, they still maintain the good and the bad qualities they possess as spirits. The faults that we commit are rooted in the imperfections of it, which has not yet developed the moral superiority it will acquire over the course of time. Despite this fact, the spirit is still in full possession of its free will. The purpose of corporeal life is to purge all the imperfections of our spirit through the trials we endure. It is precisely these imperfections that weaken us and make us vulnerable to the influences of imperfect spirits. They take advantage of our weakness when they try to make us fail in our tasks. If we are victorious in the struggle, our spirit is elevated. If we fail, our spirit remains as it was no better and no worse. However, the unsuccessful attempt will give way to a new attempt, which is a repetition of the same trial that may delay our advancement for a long period. We also improve our weaknesses. As we improve, our weaknesses diminish, and we give less and less power to those who tempt us to do wrong. As our moral strength increases constantly, low-order spirits cease to act upon us. So again, they were stressing in the beginning that it's important to remember that just because it's our thoughts doesn't mean that we have to be completely influenced. We still have the right to even if we have some sort of negative thought, to push that thought away. Or just like how if an intruder's coming in their house, you would want to close the door and lock it. You can do that to your thoughts as well. Yes, you're going to hear those thoughts and you might still hear it, but you can push those away. You can close the doors on those thoughts so that you don't have to give in to them. And of course, like they were saying here, summing up the end, is that they were saying that we reincarnated to learn more and to grow. And so of course we're going to make mistakes and we're going to accidentally listen to those negative thoughts, and then we're not going to pass that trial the first time, and then we're just going to come and do it again and repeat it in the same life or in a different life, and we're just going to keep repeating it until we learn. And of course, the quicker we learn, then the faster we can pass that trial and move on to something else. But if we don't pass that, we'll be there for a long time until we finally do pass that trial. And of course, if you mess up one time, we're not getting worse. That's always important to remember. What we've learned, that's ours. So we're not gonna get worse, but we're not gonna get any better. So we're just gonna stay still until we finally pass that trial of maybe not listening to the influences of other people or other spirits. So it's important for us in our daily lives to just think about little influences that other people have on us and maybe try and stop them. Or if they're good influences, let them in and work on which influences we should allow and which ones we shouldn't. and put little things into our lives, because the more we're learning, the more we're putting this into our lives, the quicker we'll advance in this trial, the quicker we'll overcome it if we're practicing and working on it little by little. And then the last section of this summary. All incarnate spirits, whether good or bad, make up the human race. As our planet is one of the most backward worlds in the universe, there are many more bad spirits than good spirits, and perversely is widespread. We must do our utmost not to have to return to this world after our present sojourn, and to deserve admission into a higher world, one of those privileged worlds, where goodness reigns, and where, once we get there, our time in this lower world will only be a brief, vague memory. So another thing for us here, they're saying to keep in mind, our goal is that on Earth, we're kind of one of the backwards worlds, where there's more wrong or less of all spirits than there are more of all spirits. So we want to overcome these trials so that we can move on to the worlds that are higher up than us, that have more goodness, instead of worlds like us that have more, not even badness, but just not learned yet. We haven't learned as much yet in these planets. So we want to move up to a more highly evolved world. So we need to overcome these simple trials so that we can move on to bigger and better things. And that's just like anything in life. We need to work hard now so that we can move on to the next grade or move on to the next sports team. Like if you're on JV, you want to move up to varsity, you have to work hard. So it's just like any of these other little things that we have in our lives that we need to work hard now so that we can move on and advance, or else we're going to be stuck in the lower level when we don't want to be. And so now we've finally reached the end of the Law of Freedom. And now we're on to chapter 11, which is about the law of justice, love, and charity. And the first section in this chapter is about natural rights and justice. So question 873. Is the sense of justice natural, or is it the product of acquired ideas? So here they're asking, so is justice a natural thing that we have, or is it something that we produced from a lot of ideas? And the spirits answered, it is so natural that you are immediately appalled by the idea of injustice. Moral progress definitely inspires this feeling, but it does not create it. God has placed it in the hearts of all human beings, and this is why you often find more stringent notions of justice in simple, primitive nations than others that are more educated. So here what they're saying is that justice is something that is natural to us. So it is in us, and we all have that justice within us. Like they said, God placed justice in all of our hearts. So that's why sometimes it's in primitive states, in less evolved communities and places, you can see a lot more of this justice, because that's one of their simple things that all of us have within us, this justice. Question 874. If justice is a law of nature, why do people understand it so differently? How can the same thing be just to one person, yet unjust to another? So here they're saying, so okay, if we all have justice, if justice is placed in each and every one of our hearts, then how can we understand it differently? How come I might think, oh, this is right, while another person might think that's wrong? So how come, if we all have this within us, why is it different? And the spirits answered, it is because your passions often mingle with this sentiment and corrupt it, as they do with most natural sentiments, causing you to see things from a false point of view. So in this case, they're saying it's not the justice that is wrong within us, but it's the way we're seeing a situation. So if we think about it, if we're looking at a loved one suffering through something terrible, we might think about it differently because we are a loved one. We love them and they're very close and dear to us. But someone who's not close to them at all, doesn't even know them, might see the situation completely different. So as human beings, that's one of the flaws we have, is that we kind of let our passions and our personal life come into it. So that's why our views of what's right and what's wrong come into play. It's because of our personal opinions and our personal life. But the justice that is way deep down within us that God gave to all of us is the same. Question 875. How should we define justice? So that's a simple question. So how should we define it? What's the definition of justice? And the Spirits answered, justice is respect for the rights of each and every individual. So also a quite simple answer. It's the respect for the rights of each and every individual. So it's respecting the rights for every race, every gender, every age, every size, everything. Every individual has rights that we all respect, equal rights that we all expect. And that's what justice is. And then there's a second part to this question, and it says, what determines these rights? So what are these rights? Who determines these rights that each and every one of us has? And the Spirits answered, two things, human law and natural law. As human beings have created laws in harmony with their values and characters, those laws have established rights that have varied with the progress of enlightenment. Your laws, although still far from perfect, no longer include what were considered rights in the Middle Ages. Those rights were horrific to you now, appear fair and natural at the time. Therefore, the rights established by humans are not always compliant with justice. In addition, they only govern certain social relations, while there are an infinite number of actions that are only tried privately by our conscience. So here what they're saying is that our natural laws, the natural law kind of decides what determines the rights. But another thing that comes into play is the human laws. So human laws are constantly changing, and like we've already seen that there are some laws that we look back on that we think, wow, how was that ever legal? How was that ever a right thing to do? Like if we think about slavery, how was slavery legal? Now we look at that and we think, wow, that's absurd. But at the time, to them, they say, oh, this is right, this is just. But now we've learned that no, that's not just. So our human laws are evolving so that we can become more just and so that we can work closer to those natural laws, even though we're very far away from them. But similar to women's rights. Women used to have no rights. There was no laws for women. And now, although it's still unequal, we are getting towards we are having these equal rights. And same thing with gay marriages and all these topics that we have today. We are evolving and our laws are changing to become more fair as our society's views are changing. So a big part is not only just the natural law and the justice we have inside of us, but also human law comes into play with that. But as we can see, it's not hopeless because even laws that we might think now, wow, this is so horrible, we know that soon we'll get there and we'll overcome that law as well and we'll change it to something better like we have with other laws that haven't been so great. Question 876. Apart from the rights established by human law, what is the basis of justice according to natural law? So now they said, not talking about human laws right now, but what is the basis of justice with the natural law, which is the correct law like we know, that doesn't have this human influence on it. So what's the basis of the natural law about justice? And the Spirits answered, Christ told you, do unto others as you would have others do unto you. God has placed in each of you the desire to see your rights respected as the rule of true justice. When uncertain as to what we should do in regards to other at any given moment, we should ask ourselves what we would want others to do to us under the same circumstances. God could not give us a safer guide than our own conscience. So what God did is that we care about ourselves. And even not in a selfish way, but if we think about it, we say, oh, that person did that to me, that's so wrong. But what if we did that to the other person? Would we notice that it's wrong? So what they're saying here is that in a lot of times is when we don't know if this is a right thing to do to someone else, think about what if I was in that place. So for slavery, as if we think, at that time people thought, oh, this is fine, yep, this is right. But if we think, okay, if I was a slave, would I like to be treated that way? Would I like to be like that? And then you think, no. So right there you think, then that person doesn't. So that's not right. And if we think about in more current times, if we think about maybe gender equality, maybe say, maybe you don't understand because maybe your gender is just typical and there's not much talk about it. But for some other people, their gender identity is something serious to them. There's serious issues with their gender identity in society. So what if we were in that person's shoes? Would we think that what they're going through is right? No. So obviously we see that we need to change that. So to know what is just and what is right is if we would want that to be done to us. And then Allan Kardec puts his own comment in and he says, the true measure of justice is, in fact, wanting for others what you would want for yourself. Merely wanting for yourself what you would want for others is not exactly the same thing. As it is unnatural to wish harm upon yourself, if we use our personal desires as the guide for our behavior towards our neighbors, we would never wish anything but good upon them. Universally, human beings have always sought to enforce their personal rights, while the unique factor of Christianity is the application of personal rights as the basis of our neighbor's rights. So here what they're saying is we should want for others what we would want for ourselves. So it's not about thinking about ourselves first, because like we said, that would be a little bit selfish. It's not about thinking about ourselves first. It's about wanting something for the other person and saying, oh, I want this person to have these rights. And if I would want those same rights, then that's a good desire to have for those people. So it's not about thinking, oh, I would want this, so the other person wants that too. No, it's about thinking about others first on top of that. So just thinking about ourselves first isn't enough. We have to also think about others first and think about what others would want and if we would want that as well. Question 877. Does our need to live in a society impose any special obligations? So here's saying, so what about living in a society? So we need to live in a group of people, in a community. So does this change any of our justice and any of our rights? And the Spirit said, yes. And the first of these is to respect the rights of others, as those who respect those rights will always be fair. In your worlds, where so many neglect to practice the law of justice, people turn to retaliation, and this causes trouble and confusion in your society. Social life gives rights and imposes corresponding duties. So what they're saying is, because we live in a society, we have to face even more of these challenges because people want different things and want different rights and are thinking about different things. So we need to respect the rights of others. Because think about it, if we were just by ourselves, we wouldn't have to think about the rights of others. We would just be thinking about ourselves. But because we live in a society, we need to not only think about our rights and what we would want, but what the other people would want. Like we were talking about slavery. We can't just think about, okay, yeah, I have all these rights, I'm good, I'm set to go, that's fine. No, we need to think about the other people. What about thinking about the slaves' rights, what they want? So it's not only thinking about ourselves or being by ourselves and isolated. No, we live in a society, so we have to think about the wants of other people along with ourselves. Because sometimes, even not meanly, but sometimes we might not realize that other people need things because we have those things. Sometimes we might not realize that people need to get food from other sources because we always have that food on our tables and we never have to worry about that. But we should put ourselves in the place of other people to see that, wait, some people do need food and some people need certain rights and certain programs to help them get food because they don't have any. So we have to put ourselves in the shoes of others to help ourselves see what is right and what is not right. And another important thing to keep in mind is that see what's right and what's just for everyone. Because of course there'll be things that, oh yeah, this is good for me, this is right for me, or this is right for my friend, or this is right for my school, for my town. But just because it's right for your town or even your country doesn't mean it's right for everyone. So we need to think about everyone on the big picture and on the earth scale. So that's where we'll leave off today, and we'll continue next week, continuing talking about the law of justice, love, and charity. And but before we leave off today, I'd like to read our message from the Daily Book of Positive Quotations by Linda Picone for today's date, August 7th. Self-disclosure. If you do not tell the truth about yourself, you cannot tell it about other people. When we recognize our own flaws and our own strengths, we can share them with others. We have more credibility when we assess the flaws and strengths of those around us. In fact, we have more credibility in all that we do when we are honest about ourselves with others. I know what I do well and what I don't do well. I know the mistakes I've made in the past and the successes I've had. I don't need to paint a false picture to others. I can tell my story just as it is. If at all you guys have any questions, comments, concerns, anything you want to talk about at all, feel free to email me at cardiacradioforteens@gmail.com and I'll get back to you right away. I'm Bia, and this has been Cardiac Radio for Teens. Thank you all for listening. This has been Cardiac Radio for Teens. Thank you all for listening.